and Netanyahu specifically, what I found very interesting was when first, he spoke in Hebrew when he addressed. The second is that he said that Israel is ready to, because of the 1974 agreement, 50 years, nothing happened, but right now the Syrian troops have gone, so we have to act in self-defense. Okay, understood. But what he said that Israel is ready to give olive branch to Kurds, Druze, Ismailis, and Muslims. He did not say Syrians.
So, that's a really good point. And I think what we're seeing two different things. The bombing by the United States and then the bombing by Israel. And I think there's two different motives at work here. The Israelis just want to see a weak state in Syria. They want to see a state in which institutions are going to take a long time to reestablish. They want to see a weak state.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is 11:30 a.m. in Doha. It is 1:30 p.m. in India, and I don't know what it is at your time zone whenever you're watching it. This is Middle East Insights, and please like and subscribe. My name is Dr. Shubhda Chaudhary, and I'm the founder of it. We are a non-funded, democratic, volunteer-based organization, which is very, very privileged. It is like, not able to process it, the kind of guest we have today. I'm still pinching myself. And today we are going to talk about, what is the impact or what is the role of Gulf countries in Israel-Lebanon ceasefire? As you're following, you know what is the condition of the ceasefire. So we have Mehran Kamrava today with us, and I will give a short bio because all of you know it, but I will try to do justice. So Professor Mehran Kamrava is Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar, and all of you should know where Qatar is. Kamrava, sir, is the author of a number of journal articles and books, including most recently, Righteous Politics, Power and Resilience in Iran, published in 2023, a dynastic politics or dynastic history of Iran from the Qajars to the Pahlavis in 2022, Triumph and Despair in Search of Iran's Islamic Republic, 2022, A Concise History of Revolution, 2020, Troubled Waters, Insecurity in the Persian Gulf, very important. This is 2018, Inside the Arab State, 2018, The Impossibility of Palestine, History, Geography and the Road Ahead, 2016, Qatar, Small State, Big Politics, 2015, The Modern Middle East, A Political History Since First World War, 2013, Iran's Intellectual Revolution, 2008, and there are so many books that he has edited, and if I keep reading the entire bio, it will take us one entire decade. We have not read so many books in our lifetime as he keeps on writing every year. I don't know. It's very envious also. So now welcome to all of you. And you can ask your questions in the chat box. So, sir, I will hit the nail at its head. Do you think that the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire is actually working?
Well, before I start, let me begin with a heartfelt thanks for that warm introduction. It's a privilege and an honor being here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure spending the next hour with you. A warm welcome to everyone from Doha, Qatar, where we have wonderful weather. It's December after all, so the weather is quite tolerable and very pleasant. So I wish everyone is, wherever everyone is watching this, they're having a pleasant day. The question was, is the Israel-Lebanon or Hezbollah ceasefire holding. I think so far it is. There have been, as we all know, there have been one or two hiccups where each side has accused the other of violating. But it appears as if there's a concerted will by everyone involved to ensure that the ceasefire holds and that the ceasefire is not, that the war is not reignited. I think it's there's this calculation by each side that it is to its advantage for the war to come to an end. The Lebanese, of course, have suffered tremendous devastation. One of the military doctrines of Israel assumes that one of the things that ought to be done is massive infrastructural damage. And we see that in Beirut, a city that was once called the bride of the Middle East, the Paris of the Middle East. There are areas that have been leveled and are completely decimated. So there's no will on the part of the Lebanese public in general or Hezbollah in particular to start the war with Israel because the costs are absolutely prohibitive. And then, of course, Israel doesn't want to be accused of restarting the war for no reason and breaking the ceasefire because there is pressure from the incoming Trump administration. And the closer we get to Inauguration Day in the United States, the more likely it is for a ceasefire to hold because Netanyahu is somewhat, it's as if he wants to give a gift to Donald Trump and make sure that Trump doesn't start his tenure in office with a war on his hand. And so it appears that despite the impulse to hit at the adversary, the ceasefire is holding.
So, sir, in this context, what has been the role of, for example, Qatar and Egypt are still playing very pivotal roles when it comes to the Israel-Gaza ceasefire?
As you know, whenever you engage in negotiations, there are risks involved. And in this particular case, the risks for Qatar, for a country like Qatar, are reputational. Qatar, in the Western media in general and in the United States in particular, was accused of hosting and sponsoring Hamas. Yes, it did host Hamas here in Doha, but Hamas operatives or Hamas leadership was extremely constrained. Their movements were constrained. They were being watched all the time. People knew where they were, and there was tremendous constraints on them. Then the United States asked Qatar to force Hamas to leave in terms of putting pressure on them because Hamas was not agreeing to the terms of ceasefire, which was kind of short-sighted because when they're here, you can control them. When Hamas was here, the Americans could keep an eye on them and the Qataris could control them at the behest or on behalf of the United States. When they went and they ended up in Ankara, that level of control was gone. And Qatar at some point washed its hands, said, you know what, we're not going to be involved in the negotiations. But just a couple of days ago, Qatar started saying again, yes, we're willing to negotiate, no doubt being requested to do so by the United States. And it has asked Hamas leadership to come back to Doha so it could negotiate a ceasefire. That, I think, is a very important development in the sense that Qatar has built up some credibility with Hamas leaders. It has some leverage on them that others do not. And so it can play a constructive role in in these negotiations. I think one last point that I need to mention also is the fact that in all of this, what we see is extremely close coordination and collaboration between Qatar and the United States. Let's remember that Qatar is a very small state, and it's very security dependent on the United States. Without American approval, Qatar doesn't do much, and they certainly don't do anything that would result in an American disapproval. So this re-involvement in the negotiations, asking Hamas to leave and then asking them to come back again, all is done in close collaboration and with the green light from the United States.
And yes, that was actually something which was clearly mentioned at the Doha Forum by the Qatari foreign minister also, that we are going to play a role in the ceasefire talks. So does now Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries still believe that Qatar is punching above its weight when it's having so much of power and soft power and negotiation power?
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because between 2017 and 2021, January of 21, the level of animosity between Qatar and its neighbors, particularly Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and Qatar, Bahrain, was unbelievable, to the point that Saudi Arabia even said they were going to dig a canal along the border of Qatar and Saudi Arabia to make the Qatari Peninsula into an island. I mean, it doesn't sound reasonable and logical, but that's what the Saudis were actually, they declared they were going to do. Today, ironically and paradoxically, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have become bosom buddies. They're each other's best friends. The Qataris, it's almost as if they don't do anything without Saudi Arabia. They're very close to one another. And so although the Saudis might feel that the Qataris are punching above their weight, that sense is unlikely to translate into diplomatic tensions between the two for the time being. Even between the UAE and Qatar, where the Emiratis are extremely sensitive to ceding any diplomatic space or any kind of glory to the Qataris. The sense is that, we'll just tolerate it. GCC is one again, and they're acting on behalf of the whole of the GCC.
Wow, that's a good U-turn after all the blockade and everything that was going on. So my next question, sir, is with what is happening in Syria. So what exactly from Doha, what is your how do you see HTS? What exactly is HTS?
Well, I think everybody is trying to figure that out. That's an extremely good question, but one to which right now we don't really have a good answer, because HTS has had a very tormented, checkered past, a history written in blood, a history in which there were recorded beheadings. There was, and HTS itself is listed as a terrorist organization by the United States. And now that, they've captured power, Jolani, the leader of HTS, is saying all the right things and, talks about building institutions, talks about maintaining a measure of stability, although there's tremendous chaos and lawlessness right now in Damascus and other Syrian cities. But at least he's been saying all the right stuff. Whether or not the HTS leadership is able to bring together the centrifugal forces to which Assad's removal has given rise is a different question. And I think everybody is waiting to see what is going to happen over the next several days or several weeks to see whether or not Qatar is going to, or whether or not Syria will go the way of Afghanistan, whether or not it'll go the way of Libya in terms of, or whether or not it'll go the way of Iraq, kind of some central government which steadily over time is able to expand its reach and control over the different parts of the Syrian territory. The last scenario, which is the most optimistic, unfortunately, is also the least likely, because we know that there is the American presence, there is the Turkish element, there is, Syria is not an easy place to govern. And so and also let's keep in mind that it is always significantly easier to attack and topple a government than it is to administer and govern. Yeah. And so we'll have to just wait and see. And I think everybody is taking a wait and see attitude. What is, I think, important, particularly for the Gulf states, and especially for Qatar, which, unlike many of the other regional actors, never really formally embraced Assad again, and they always kind of maintained an opposition embassy here. I think they can play a very constructive moderating role right now. Usually, groups like this don't respond positively to threats. If you threaten them, they double down. But they do respond positively to conditional engagement. So you engage with them in exchange for certain concessions on their part. If you don't engage in acts of extremism, we're willing to recognize you. We're willing to help you with reconstruction of a war-ravaged country in return for A, B, and C. And so I think that sort of conditional engagement, where countries such as Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia are in a position to do, is tremendously important for right now. And whether or not local leaders have the foresight to do that remains to be seen.
But the idea of conditional engagement, sir, is correct. But Syria is, like yesterday, there were 75 US strikes on ISIS quarters. Israel has taken over the buffer zone of Golan Heights. It has entered 14 kilometers, entered and took over Quneitra and many others. It has also been bombing Daraa, Damascus throughout yesterday. And Netanyahu specifically, what I found very interesting was when first he spoke in Hebrew when he addressed. The second is that he said that Israel is ready to, because of the 1974 agreement, 50 years, nothing happened, but right now the Syrian troops have gone, so we have to act in self-defense. Okay, understood. But what he said that Israel is ready to give olive branch to Kurds, Druze, Ismailis, and Muslims. He did not say Syrians.
Yes. So, that's a really good point. And I think what we're seeing two different things. The bombing by the United States and then the bombing by Israel. And I think there's two different motives at work here. The Israelis just want to see a weak state in Syria. They want to see a state in which institutions are going to take a long time to reestablish themselves. They want to see a weak state. And they're aware that although Assad is gone, they would have much preferred a weakened Assad, who never threw so much as a stone against them, than to see and kind of potentially extremist, violent group come to power right at their at their doorstep, that where the leader wants the Golan Heights back, and is called Jolani, has named himself after the place where he and his family had to escape. So, that I think the Israeli motive is to see Syria as weakened as possible, and as kind of as fragile as possible. And Syrian politics must become fragile. The United States, my sense, is that Americans have been there for a long time. And for a long time, we've seen tremendous inaction. They would kind of compete with the Russians, and they would do this, but they never engaged in the kind of bombing that they did yesterday. And my sense, and I could be very wrong, but my sense is that there's a direct correlation between Donald Trump's tweet that said, let's get out of Syria, it's a mess, it's not our problem, let them deal with it themselves, and the sudden kind of awakening by the Biden administration in its waning days that America's days in Syria might be numbered. And so suddenly they decided, let's bomb the daylights out of ISIS before the new commander-in-chief takes over and says, American forces get out of Syria. And I think, the reason that the United States has been there for so long, but hasn't done much, and kind of has held the status quo, the timing is a little too coincidental or a little too suspicious to kind of think that there's no correlation. No doubt that for some time now, since the US election, many of the actions that the US has taken, the Biden administration has taken, is with an eye towards the impending presidential transition of power in the United States. And if the first Trump administration is any indication, there's going to be tremendous disruptions in expected patterns of American foreign policy, because Trump has a very different set of assumptions about American foreign policy. I'll be happy to kind of discuss them if need be, but.
Yeah, but because, I was, when Biden spoke yesterday, he highlighted the speech that he gave 45 minutes late at Rose Garden on the ceasefire. And then somehow he took credit of everything. The liberation of Syria. Somehow he took credit of everything. Like, this is a result of October 7 and how he did not talk about the ICC warrants. He did not talk about Palestine. He did not talk about human rights in Lebanon. He did not talk about any kind of collateral damage which has been happening on a daily level.
Absolutely. Biden's legacy is going to be one of genocide, ethnic cleansing, arrest warrants against Israeli leaders, and repeated violations by the United States of international law and international conventions. And so he is eager to cling on to anything that would salvage his legacy and would make his name not become synonymous with Israel's genocide of Palestinians. And that's what we're seeing in relation to Syria, what you just mentioned. He's going to claim credit for anything and everything that has nothing to do with him.
Yeah, and he'll be seen taking the copy of Rashid Khalidi's book outside of the bookstore. And was it planted or was it just candid? I have no idea, but it was completely very late to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was, so how do you think, sir? On one hand, Trump has appointed Massad Boulous, who is a Lebanese-American billionaire also. His son is married to Tiffany, Trump's daughter. Then he has appointed Mike Huckabee. He has appointed Marco Rubio. All of them are very Mike Huckabee is hardcore evangelical. Rubio is completely anti-Hamas, not at all for any kind of ceasefire. And Tulsi Gabbard is, I don't know how much power she has, but there are also rumors or rhetoric that she is working, like she is more sympathetic towards the Russians. So he can fire them any day. Not that, being selected is something of a longevity. But how do you think Trump's policies are different when it comes to the ceasefire negotiations, be it the maintenance of, because 60 days of Israel-Lebanon ceasefire finishes on 26th of January. That is 6 days after Trump is in office. And Israel-Gaza, we don't know.
Right. Excellent question, and I wish I had a crystal ball and looked into it, and I could tell you. So, I think Trump is going to elect whoever, and he has appointed whoever he wants to. But there's a couple of interesting facts. One, that he didn't bring Pompeo back into the fold. And although he had a falling out, he also didn't bring Bolton, and when John Bolton. And one of the assumptions was that these guys were too radical or too eager to use American military force when they were, during the first iteration of the Trump administration. And although unconfirmed, there are rumors that Trump has had a talking with Rubio and has told him to kind of take it easy. I think in many respects, we're going to see a repetition of the first Trump foreign policy, which kind of gave Israel a free hand to do what it wanted and gave Saudi Arabia a free hand to do what it wanted. But I think second time, Trump is going to be much more concerned about his legacy. This is his last rodeo. And he is, American presidents, once they're not anymore concerned about elections, either re-election for themselves or elections in the US Congress, become extremely preoccupied with their own legacy. And especially someone like Trump, for him, question of how he's perceived and, he's this president, that president. But there's a fundamental difference here between Trump and Biden/Harris. Biden saw the world through extremely ideological lenses in which the United States played a very important role in the global order of things. And in that order, Israel also played an important role. Biden was very ideological, if you listen to his speeches to American troops in particular, and kind of talking about the mission that they were serving, American troops abroad. And, if you hear him talk about the mission that they were serving on the part of the United States for the world and what that meant globally, it was extremely revealing in terms of his ideological mindset. There's a particular world order in which the United States has a responsibility and a right to do certain things. And in that responsibility and a right, one of those is to ensure that no harm ever comes to Israel or no constraint ever comes to Israel, because Israel can do no wrong and it can do whatever it wants. Trump is different. He doesn't have this ideological prism. He's much more transactional. And for Trump, what's important are two things. First, is it good for him personally and now his legacy? And second, is it good for the United States? So, he's the only president to have shaken hands with the leader of North Korea and actually even taken a couple of steps on North Korean soil. And yes, it was for show, but I think, that shows you how pragmatic and kind of transactional he is. What's in it for me? What can I get out of this? And, the so-called love letters that he exchanged with Kim Jong-un and North Korea until that all came to naught. But I think my sense is that Trump is, and we've already seen it in his tweet. It's not America's problem. We'll get out of Syria, and don't do anything. Let's just get out of Syria, and so I think Trump does not like war because wars are not good for business. He feels that ultimately they're harmful for America's national interests. And so he's likely to see as much concession given to Israel as possible, but ultimately he would be much more inclined to have a ceasefire in a place like Gaza than Biden was. Maybe all of this is naive optimism on my part, but that's what I think for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, like none of us can, you talked correctly about the crystal ball, but you were completely correct that this was his last rodeo. He was very sad that the 900th rally was the last rally that he did. Very sad. And he also, imagine a space where we're discussing about his tweets. Just imagine, imagine about it. And then what I really don't understand currently is that how is Iran bracing for Trump's office? Because Iran, on one hand, is talking with Turkey, it is talking with Saudi Arabia, it wants a nuclear deal. I also think that if Iran tells Trump that you can build 4 or 5 Trump towers in Tehran or Isfahan, it will seal the deal and all the nuclear talks will start. And to be that superficial. But this is, do you think, as because the Western media is propagating the fact that, oh, Iran is weak, Hezbollah is weak, all of them are, Houthis are weak. But these are not, like one is a state, one is a idea, and the other is a social movement.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. First of all, in terms of Trump, I think you're spot on. If Iran were to say, come and invest, they would. And already there have been positive signals. You know that there was this reported meeting between Iran's representative to the United Nations and Elon Musk. And jokingly, at the end of the meeting, the Iranian ambassador had told Elon Musk, why don't you get a sanctions relief, get an exemption from the US Treasury, and come and invest in Iran? And that had piqued Elon Musk's interests, apparently. So already the Iranians, one of the things we see when we look at Iranian foreign policy, and we've seen this in relation to India, in relation to China, in relation to many other places, there's a distinct difference between the rhetoric of Iranian foreign policy that tends to be very ideological, very dogmatic, very revolutionary, and the practice of Iranian foreign policy, which is based on cold balance of power, cost-benefit analysis, and kind of calculations that are very strategic and very pragmatic and practical. And as a revolutionary state, the Iranian leaders feel that they have to keep up their rhetoric, but as a functioning state in the world, they have to be very mindful of what is Iran's practical interests. And one of the things, we've seen this in relation to the Trump administration. Khamenei refers to Trump as that professional gambler, he calls him. And then at the same time, the president, the vice president, and the foreign minister have been given the green light by the supreme leader to send positive signals to the United States and say, look, we're eager to kind of restart negotiations. I think the JCPOA is dead. Iranians have declared that they don't like the terms of the JCPOA anymore. It doesn't work for them. So it's not a question of reviving a morbid agreement. It's a question of coming up with a new agreement. And if the stars are aligned, and if the Iranians can swallow their revolutionary pride, and if Trump can hold at bay the Mark Rubios of his administration, then I think we might see tangible progress, or at least some sort of conversation between these two folks that since 2018 have been shouting insults at each other.
Yeah, I mean, and the impact of it is also seen in India. So every time I have to write academically, what is the terminology that I use? That India is using multi-vector dehyphenated approach. No one knows what it is. I don't know what it is, but I that is what I use. It's like it has to make academic sense, and academics don't make sense, so it's okay.
Exactly.
that is
Exactly.
that is something which is, and the impact on us in terms of this has also been very strong. And again, Trump is now, like speaking on breaks and talking about patronizing, and it's back. The gibberish is back on an everyday level. So let's see
Right.
for the Indian government also, because Iran has been a very, very, very old friend. It's, the name India is also from the Persian language, and um, uh, from the spice trade, from the Silk Route, from the Mughals, all of it. I mean, like this, for me, it feels as if the Western imperialism is cutting down post-colonial societies into their own ambit of geographical and ideological spaces. In apart from
Exactly.
whatever history they have, they don't care. So
Exactly.
that is something which I find, and I talk with my Iranian friends, and I'm often told that, okay, whenever I speak in defense of Iran, or if I speak in defense of the GCC countries or whatever, Sam said that you are a Hezbollah agent, and I'm like, spelled Hezbollah correctly. So that is the point. Now coming
Right.
to the next question. So Khamenei is going to address the audience on December 11. I don't know what the address is going to be. And at the same time, yesterday, Erdogan says that there are only two very, very important presidents in the world. One is him, who has finished 22 years, and the other is Putin, who's almost going to finish the same time frame. So, how do you see Turkey? Because Turkey, the entire emergence of HTS from Idlib, the location of Idlib, um, the Kurdish issue, the Kurds are in the northeastern part of Syria where the oil and gas fields are. Um, how do you see Turkey balancing with the GCC countries?
Well, you know that during the blockade, Turkey really was Qatar's lifeline. Qatar had two critical lifelines. One was Turkey, the other was Iran. And Turkey, during the blockade, started a base here, a forward base. It's a small base that has 2,000 soldiers in it, but nonetheless a military presence meant to hold at bay a potential invasion by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But then Turkey patched up its differences with the GCC, with the rest of the GCC. And it's one of the main trading partners with UAE, and it's got very cordial relations now with Saudi Arabia. So Turkey has been able to, in many ways, strategically place itself in a pretty position whereby it now maintains extensive commercial and trade relations with most GCC states, and it has warm and cordial diplomatic relations. And so, you know, and like all diplomats and all practices of diplomacy, the Gulf states parse out their relations, or if not parse out, they prioritize. They might disagree with what Turkey is doing in Syria in terms of the Kurds, but they deal with it, they negotiate with it, they engage in trade with it, and Turkey has emerged as an important actor in the region. It's become a big important actor, and so I don't think there's going to be a sense of in any way discord. I think I could even envision a scenario in which Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and or the UAE would seek to impress upon Erdogan that it would be good if they could play a moderating role in the emerging political establishment in Syria.
Yeah, I mean, like, yes, it's completely dumbfounding how fluid the relationships are. And that's the beauty of it. But it's also very difficult to predict, like what will happen. There's so much of deep state and military industrial complex and the cultural ethnic ties and so many things. And none of these diplomats say mean what they say. And eventually they will U-turn after a few days. Uh, I'm going to now ask a blasphemous question, which intuitively I think is going to impact GCC. Israel has a plan of a greater Israel, which includes northern part of Saudi Arabia also, Jordan, most of Levant, Iraq. Do you think that all of this that is happening right now, starting from Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, now Syria, and after Syria it might go into Iraq or Jordan, and then Saudi, depending how MBS, signs the accord or doesn't sign the accord. But do you think that there's an entire geographical maneuvering behind this in the long term, say 10 years from now?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I wish I knew. I honestly don't know. I mean, there are so many um, uh, sovereignties involved, so many borders. We never thought 2 days, 3 days ago, we never thought Bashar Assad would fall. 10 years ago, we never thought we would be in the Middle East where we are today. I remember in the early 2000s, I one time traveled to Iran, and I was surrounded by these young PhDs, and everybody was asking me when borders were going to disappear. That's when everybody was talking about globalization and kind of give everybody, everyone was, uh, the world is flat era.
Yeah.
And I kind of was taken aback. I thought maybe I didn't know something, but the fact that everybody was talking about the disappearance of borders, and today what we're talking about is how many walls and actual physical barriers are being erected between borders that physically separate one country from another instead of making them disappear. So many times we pretend or we think we know global trends, and we're dead wrong. And we don't know what, no one
Yeah.
would have predicted the re-emergence of Donald Trump after everything he said and everything he did and everything, all the legal actions against him. So I think it's very difficult to predict. So coming back to your question, that's perfectly, there are no doubt corners of Israeli society that would like to see this expansion from the sea to the river and beyond, and absolutely no doubt, and that those elements have been emboldened. Their voices has now gone mainstream, and it's been much more common to hear this refrain. But what I think it's difficult to predict. I have a hard time kind of envisioning that the Saudis would kind of cede territory, but you never know. I mean, we're desert is extremely relatively easy to traverse. It's just empty land, and so I can envision somebody going and planting a flag 10, 20 kilometers inside somebody else's territory.
Yeah, it is. But, I think most of the time the human nature of predicting is also because these wars and these bloodshed make us feel so small and insignificant, no matter how socio-economically, wherever we are, so that we try to predict to have our own, idea of what kind of role we can have, even at a small, like this is my personal, like, because there's nothing else we can do. Exactly nothing else. The entire normalization of ethnic cleansing and
Right.
consuming it,
Absolutely.
nothing we can do.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Sir Fayaz is asking a question that given the transformation of Jalani from a jihadist leader to a political figure wearing Western clothes and Raymonds and everything, I'm adding to that, and his efforts to reshape his group's image, because he's like a very bitter fiance, sometimes Al Qaeda, sometimes ISIS, Syrian Jabhat al Nusra, then HTS, and then suddenly if he stays alive, I don't know what he'll hop into. So do you think that the Gulf states, particularly those that have shown recent interest in engaging with Syria, might respond to his increasing political legitimacy and evolving situation in Idlib and other places, Damascus, Aleppo? He was there showcasing at Aleppo Citadel. He was there at the Umayyad Mosque and praying, and all these photo ops were taking place. So, do you think that it will have any impact? Will the Gulf states embrace him?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think what first of all, the proof is in the pudding. When I never forget, I'm old enough to remember that when Khomeini came to power, before he came to power, he said all the right things. And Western reporters would specifically be fed questions by people surrounding Khomeini so he could answer those specific questions. Would women what position would women have? And he would say, they could do anything. They're completely free. What position would religious minorities have? They could do anything. They would be free. Khomeini also said all the right things, and then he came to power, and Iran experienced the reign of terror. So the proof is in the pudding. I think the next few weeks are going to and months are going to prove critical in Syria in terms of what kind of a political establishment, at least in the short run, is going to emerge. Is it a reformed ISIS or an institutionalized ISIS? Are we going to see once again Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and his little emirate, or are we going to see the Taliban in Afghanistan scenario? Or are we indeed going to see revolutionaries who, as they claim, are now reformed, are interested in continuity, in the least amount of chaos and instability, and they have shed their extremist skin? So, I think we'll have to wait and see how, and that kind of behavior is going to impact the way that the GCC states relate to, and Iran for that matter, relate to the new political establishment. Because by and large, the GCC states tend to be extremely pragmatic and practical. They're as small states that are very security dependent on the United States. They don't like too many enemies. And if they have adversaries like Iran, for example, after a few years, they try to patch things up. And so my sense is that they will each try to find their own modus vivendi with the new emerging political powers in Damascus. At different rates, no doubt. The Qataris have always maintained relationship with the Syrian opposition, so they have an early starter's advantage. They have networks, they know people, the Emiratis have shown a greater level of sensitivity and to political Islam, and they've actually been very allergic to expressions of political Islam. So it could be that it might take them longer, and we'll have to wait and see how Saudi Arabia, probably same thing with the Saudis. One of the things we're seeing is an interesting change of tone coming out of Tehran. A couple of days before the Syrian opposition took Damascus, the Iranian state television stopped calling the Syrian revolutionaries terrorists. And it kind of said it stopped calling them terrorists and kind of called them revolutionaries or rebel groups was the actual term that was used. And then yesterday and day before yesterday, what was quite interesting was that the Iranian foreign minister referred to Jabhat al-Nusra as, or rather Tahrir al-Sham, called them legitimate opposition. He used the word legitimate, which is kind of interesting in terms of the change of rhetoric coming out of Tehran. So I think, Tehran, Doha, and even Abu Dhabi and Riyadh are likely to deal with Damascus in the same way that they deal with Taliban. They're there, they're the government, they may not be recognized, they might be on all sorts of blacklists, but you cannot ignore Syria or pretend that Syria doesn't exist. It doesn't serve your national interests to ignore Syria altogether.
And one secretive question that I have to ask that we all know, and we all knew that Bashar al-Assad, the funniest tweet was that even after being an ophthalmologist, he didn't see it coming. And but Bashar al-Assad and his family got asylum in within a day in Russia. But my question is, where is his younger brother, Maher al-Assad, the head of the military intelligence? That is a very important,
Great question. I don't know. I have no idea. I wish I knew.
It's good that you don't know. Yeah. Because he's very scary. So, we don't know, because that would also not really, I don't know, because the Syrian prime minister, when he was speaking from his house. And then there were footage of the HTS taking him out and, following around him like bodyguards. And I felt sorry for him, though he is in talks. HTS has said that it's in negotiations with having backdoor channel of communication with Russia, with Jordan, Lebanon, Israel. Didn't mention US. And within its territory, it's going to have talks with, Armenians and Ismailis and Druze and Kurds. But one very important aspect that is also happening, that a lot of Syrian Shias are going back to Lebanon.
Right. There's a tremendous fear among the Shia. Absolutely.
And
I think, also the question on everyone's mind is, would any of the Syrian refugees go back? The three countries right now that host the greatest Syrian refugees are three of its neighbors, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. And the question is, would these, Turkey apparently has something like 3 million Syrian refugees. Would those folks be going back?
Yeah,
that, I think, is the question.
Yeah, and the refugee crisis that, because Mediterranean Sea still exists.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The same, for me, what I feel that the examples of Alan Kurdi and others, they will still exist. They still exist in many, many small corners of Gaza, in West Bank and others. And at the same time, there are so many Israeli peace activists like Mao Zenon. There are Israeli scholars like Ori Goldberg, the daughter of Amy Oz, a very famous historian, Fania Oz Salzberger, who are continuously talking about the Israeli civil society way before 7th of October. But Haaretz is getting sanctions and they are not getting a voice.
Right. Well, as you know, Netanyahu is extremely divisive and extremely unpopular among some. However, Israeli society as a whole has moved to the far right. And so as a general rule, what was extremely marginal has become mainstream in Israel. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, in the process, peace activists and civil society and those who have been, for many, the voice of Palestinians, they've been completely sidelined and their voices have been drowned out.
Yeah. So with this, sir, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I still cannot believe it that I have talked with you. I still cannot. Honestly,
Good.
I know that you have a very, very hectic routine, and I can tell you that whoever you meet in, along with the disco light that my table lamp is doing, no matter how many people you're going to meet, today, tomorrow, whatever, but today you have made a lifetime of memory for me.
You are extremely kind. I'm humbled and deeply honored by your kindness. It's really, I'm humbled and I'm so grateful to you for this opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you. It's always a pleasure. I am only a student of the Middle East, and I'm really thrilled that over the last 50 minutes or so, we were able to engage in an intellectual puzzle together.
Yes.
And so I'm deeply grateful to you for this opportunity. I'm very honored to be with you, and you've made my day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
God
you.
bless you, Sepas, and Toda, Shukran, all of it from our side. And
Thank you so much.
This was the best.
Oh, you're
You
very
made my
kind.
ear. So,
You're very kind. I appreciate it. I wish all of you a good day.
thank you so much.